Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Wandering Road podcast. I'm your host Chris, and today we're going to be talking about the murder of Sylvia Likens. For those of you that are a little bit squeamish and don't like true crime, it makes you uncomfortable, this is a forewarning before I get started today. But again, we're going to be talking about the unfortunate murder of Sylvia Marie Likens. Sylvia Marie Likens was born on January 3rd in the year of 1949 in Lebanon, Indiana. She was the third of 5 children. She was born to carnival workers Lester Cecil Likens and his wife Elizabeth Betty Francis. Daniel and Diana were twins who were 2 years older than Sylvia. Betty and Jenny were her younger siblings. Her sister Jenny suffered from polio and had to consistently wear a steel brace on her leg. Unfortunately, her parents' marriage was not the most stable. They often sold refreshments at carnival stands throughout the summer, so they were carnival workers. And because of that, they constantly experienced severe financial difficulties and were consistently on the move to move with the carnival in order to keep up with work. And because of that, the Likens' son regularly traveled with his parents to assist with work, but Sylvia and Jenny were often left behind because they didn't think those young girls should be subject to the things that they would experience in the carnival life. As a result of that, the girls would frequently stay with relatives, and it was common for them to stay with their grandmother. In her teen years, Sylvia earned money by babysitting, running errands, and whatever she would earn, she would share with her mother and her family. She was a very nice, kind, giving young girl. Her friends and family described her as confident, lively, with long, wavy, light brown hair, and was given the nickname Cookie by her friends. By the time 1965 rolled around, Sylvia and Jenny had been living with their parents in Indianapolis. Given that her parents would often travel to work at carnivals, her parents had to leave for work. And that is when her father, Lester Likens, had arranged for his daughters to board with Gertrude Baniszewski. Gertrude was the mother of 2 girls that Sylvia and her sister Jenny had become acquainted with at school, and their names were Paula and Stephanie Baniszewski. So through this acquaintance or friendship, that's how they ended up meeting Gertrude. And her parents, Sylvia's parents, set up a boarding agreement in which $20 a week was in exchange for Gertrude to care for their daughters as if they were her own children. The 2 girls moved in with Gertrude, and they were supposed to be returned to their parents in the November of that year. So her parents would be gone working for the carnival from July 1965 all the way to November of 1965. And little did they know, they made an agreement to send their little girls to the home of a monster. And that monster was none other than Gertrude Baniszewski. Gertrude was born on September 19th, 1928 in Indianapolis, Indiana. She was the third of 6 children from a working class family. After her father had died, she dropped out of high school at age 16 to marry her first husband. Gertrude had 3 marriages, where she experienced emotional and physical abuse. By the time 1965 rolled around, Gertrude was living alone with 7 children. Paula, age 17, Stephanie, age 15, John, 12, Marie, age 11, Shirley, 10, James, 8, and Dennis Lee Wright Jr., 1. Gertrude was described as being 5'6", 100 pounds, and a haggard, underweight asthmatic, and a chain smoker that suffered from clinical depression due to her many failed relationships and marriages. Also, Gertrude was 36 years old at the time. So the girls move in with Gertrude into her home, and the first 2 weeks their new life went fine without any issues. Because Jenny had polio, like I said earlier, she had to wear a leg brace, and she couldn't do much around the house. Being the kind-hearted individual that Sylvia was, she offered to pick up the slack for her sister. She made sure that the chores for both girls were done on time. During that 2-week span, there was little to no discipline, and the girls slotted into the family seamlessly. They attended church, Sunday school. Sylvia sang along to pop records with Stephanie. The pastor at the church even commended Sylvia for her piety. So everything was fine. Everything was hunky-dory. Everything was going okay, as everyone expected it to be. It was all a fairy tale until the money stopped coming in. After about 2 weeks, the payments that the Likens had promised Gertrude had stopped arriving on the prearranged dates and were occasionally late. So, in response to this, what does Gertrude do? Does she do the sensible thing that any adult would do and confront the parents about it? Be like, hey, we made this agreement. If you're short on money or something, just please let me know. You know, have an adult conversation about it. But what does this sick bastard do? She starts taking out frustration on the two sisters. Now picture this. She would take a 1/4-inch thick paddle and start beating their bare buttocks. And while she's beating them, she would make such statements, and I quote, "Well, I took care of you two little bitches for a week for nothing." Let that sink in for a second. Parents are late in the payment. A normal person would say, hey, what's going on? Are you not going to be able to, uphold the end of your agreement? Are we going to have to make a change? No, what does Gertrude do? She goes to physical violence. On one occasion in late August, both girls were beaten approximately 15 times with the paddle after Paula, one of Gertrude's daughters, accused the sisters of eating too much food at the church supper. So Paula apparently didn't like that the girls were eating too much food at the church supper. I guess this was a community supper where everyone came together and there was a spread. You had your fill. Paula, for whatever reason, didn't like that. Bitched about it, and then Gertrude decided, hey, let's not talk about it. Let me go ahead and hit these girls with the paddle. Makes complete sense, right? The abuse quickly escalated with Sylvia as the main focus of Gertrude's wrath. And folks have speculated that the reason that Sylvia was the main focus and Gertrude's motivation was because Gertrude was probably jealous of Sylvia's youth. Sylvia had a youthful, happy appearance. She had respectability in the community, and she had unlimited potential. Sylvia was subject to beatings, starvation. They forced the poor girl to eat leftovers or spoiled food out of garbage cans. On one occasion, Gertrude accused Sylvia of stealing candy that Sylvia had purchased herself with her own money. So this lady was finding whatever reason to take out her anger and frustration on this poor girl that she promised to take care of like she was one of her own children. Is it because she saw in Sylvia what she was when she was younger and that she fucked it up? Quite possibly. When Sylvia claimed to have a boyfriend in Long Beach, whom she met in the spring of 1965 when her family had lived in California, she became the subject of humiliation. Humiliation started by Gertrude. Gertrude asked Sylvia if she had ever done anything with a boy, to which Likens, uncertain of what she really meant by that. Clearly, Sylvia had no idea what Gertrude was insinuating at the time. So Gertrude asked if she ever did anything with a boy, and Likens said, I guess so, and said that, hey, we went to skate parks, we went to the beach, and then Sylvia mentioned that one time she laid under the covers with her boyfriend, which then prompted rage within Gertrude to ask her, why did you do that, Sylvia? And Sylvia, still not understanding what was going on, said, I don't know, shrugging it off. make matters even worse, a few days later, she would tell Sylvia, "You're certainly getting big in the stomach, Sylvia. It looks like you're going to have a baby." The poor girl thought she was joking around and responded, "Yeah, it sure is getting big. I'm going to have to go on a diet." And Gertrude made it a point to tell all the girls in the house that if they did something with the boy, they would end up having a baby. Then, conveniently, after telling all of the girls this, she felt the need to kick Sylvia in the genitals. You know what's even more ridiculous about this? She has this talk with the girls about doing stuff with boys and possible pregnancy, and her eldest daughter, Paula herself, was 3 months pregnant at the time. Because Paula was visibly pregnant, she was jealous of Sylvia's appearance, and that is when Paula began to participate in the abuse of Sylvia. She would knock her off her chair onto the kitchen floor and shout, "You ain't fit to sit in a chair." Being stuck in a home where you're being abused by multiple people, it was difficult for Sylvia to retaliate. So she took the only chance she had, which was to retaliate at school. And what did kids at that age normally do at school? It certainly happened at my school. Rumors started to spread. So Sylvia started to spread a rumor that the two sisters, Stephanie and Paula, were prostitutes. When they found out about that, Stephanie confronted Sylvia about it and then punched her in the face. Sylvia cried and apologized. The two girls hugged and cried over it, but Stephanie's boyfriend, Coy Randolph Hubbard, heard the rumor and decided to brutally attack Sylvia. He slapped her on the head multiple times. He banged her head against the wall multiple times. He flipped her backwards onto the floor. And then, to make matters even worse, when Gertrude found out about the rumors, she used a paddle to beat her as well. So here we see a consistent pattern here of this girl, poor girl, being targeted, constantly being targeted over money. It couldn't have been the money at this point to me. Was it a sick power flexing that they felt over her because they were her caretakers at the time? I can't really say. Gertrude consistently accused her of promiscuity and engaging in prostitution. Gertrude would frequently rant about how prostitutes were the filthiest women. She would even force Jenny, Sylvia's sister, to hit her own sister. And if Jenny didn't comply with orders, Gertrude would beat her as well. As if life wasn't hell enough already, Coy Hubbard and several classmates began to frequently visit the residence to both physically and verbally torment Sylvia. They'd all collaborate together, along with Gertrude, on how to abuse Sylvia. And with encouragement of Gertrude, neighborhood children started partaking in the abuse of Likens as well. They'd use her as a practice dummy for violent judo sessions. They'd lacerate her body, burn her with lit cigarettes in excess of 100 times. At one point, trigger warning, Sylvia was forced to strip naked in the family living room and forced to masturbate in front of Gertrude and the other teenagers with a glass Pepsi bottle. Talking about humiliating someone. How low can you possibly get? Another thing is that some of you might be thinking like, well, why didn't the girls notify their family? Like, why didn't they tell anyone? And it was because the girls were fearful. They were fearful that if they notified family members or other adults of what was going on, the abuse would get even worse. And on top of that, they were constantly being threatened with a fear of escalation in the abuse. Even though the girls were fearful of reaching out for help, they eventually did reach out to their older sister. They happened to meet up with their older sister at a park. They explained to their older sister Diana what was going on. All of the abuse, the verbal abuse, the mistreatment, everything that was happening to them. And Diana thought they were lying, that they were being dramatic, and they just didn't want to be there anymore and didn't believe them, unfortunately. That must have been such a deflating feeling for both girls. They finally have the chance to tell someone what was going on, someone that could actually help them out of this situation, and they just think you're being dramatic and you're making it up, from what I understand. What baffled me the most about this entire case is that neighborhood kids and classmates were getting involved in this situation. I don't understand what goes through a kid's mind or anyone's mind to think, hey, it's okay for me to go to this house and abuse this girl like it was just a regular Friday afternoon activity to do, or just an after school activity for kids to do. I don't understand how this was allowed to happen. For kids to be involved, for so many kids to be going in and out of that home to abuse this poor girl. Where's the parenting? If my kids were frequenting a home, I would want to know what the fuck was going on, to be honest with you. Why are you constantly going over there even though you've never gone there before? Why are all these kids and these students, classmates, whatever the hell you want to call them, why are they all convening at this one location? Did nobody have an inquisitive bone in their body at the time to think, hey, maybe I should look into this? Maybe I should look into why my child is constantly going over to the Baniszewski household? Like, what was actually going on? What were people thinking at the time? That's what I want to know. What were these kids thinking? Not Gertrude's kids, because they're all fucking monsters too. But what were these other kids that were doing this thinking? For them to think that this was okay, because I'm pretty sure they weren't raised to be that way, one would hope. And to make the poor girl do that thing with the Pepsi Cola bottle, that's beyond outrageous. Talking about humiliating a person and making it worse for them while they're already down, like you're already abusing her daily. You're beating her, you're cutting her, you're torturing her. Clearly that wasn't enough for the Baniszewski family. Clearly it wasn't enough. Because of the brutal torture that Sylvia had endured, she ended up suffering from incontinence, which meant that the poor girl could not control when she urinated. She lost all function and control of her bladder because of all the beatings that she took and all the torture that she went through. So, as a result, Sylvia tended to wet herself uncontrollably. Like, she would be sleeping in bed, she'd wet herself. If she had to go to the restroom, she couldn't hold it, she would just go. As a result of that, Gertrude thought the perfect thing to do to fix this is to abuse her further. And what did Gertrude decide to do? Tie her up, toss her in the basement. She kept her naked, rarely fed her, deprived her of water, would hang her in the basement, not by her neck obviously, but suspend her so her feet wouldn't be able to touch the floor. And on top of that, they would treat her like a carnival freak show. Her parents work at a carnival, and unfortunately, Gertrude and her terrible family decided that they were going to treat her like a carnival freak show. Now, that wasn't said specifically in the case files. This is me using that as an example from everything that I researched about this case. How did she do that? I mentioned earlier that neighborhood kids were involved in on all of this. Yeah, neighborhood kids were charged 5 cents to see Sylvia's body and to further humiliate her by beating her, scalding her, and mutilating her. And to make matters even worse, like that wasn't even worse enough, you have all of these kids randomly showing up from all around the neighborhood, paying money to torture you. Gertrude was essentially running some sort of like makeshift torture shop in her basement, charging these kids 5 cents, which I believe in 1965 was a decent amount of money. After the kids would take turns paying and torturing this girl, Gertrude and her family thought it would be a good idea to take Sylvia and toss her into a tub of scalding hot water and then rub salt into her wounds so she could heal whatever way that she can, for them to do this all over again. Gertrude would not only do that, she would force Sylvia to eat feces. There was one incident where she took the dirty diaper filled with shit from her 1-year-old child, took it, smeared it all over Sylvia's face and her mouth, like shoved the diaper in her mouth and smeared it all over. And in another hand, she had a glass of water, and she forced Sylvia to consume the baby's feces along with the water. And this was happening in front of everybody. And I guess this monster had some sort of humanity, because Gertrude eventually decided to allow Sylvia to sleep upstairs again, but on the condition that she learned not to wet herself. Like I said before, the poor girl was beaten to the point where she developed an issue where she couldn't control her bladder. She couldn't control her urination. So to expect her to do that was ridiculous. And I had a feeling that Gertrude knew exactly what she was doing when she made that one stipulation, because she knows that Sylvia can't control her bladder, that she's going to go when she has to go, no matter where she is, no matter what she's doing, and she will eventually wet the bed in her sleep because she can't hold it in. That is the condition that she's suffering because of all the abuse that she suffered. And then Gertrude, being the terrible person that she is, she said, hey, you can stay back upstairs, you can sleep upstairs on the condition that you no longer piss yourself. Knowing damn well that Sylvia cannot control it. Talk about a lose-lose situation. And what ended up happening? Sylvia ended up wetting herself. And again, she was forced to insert a glass bottle into herself in the family room, like I described before, in front of Gertrude and in front of everyone that was there. And probably kids that paid to see this as well. I wouldn't be shocked if that was the case. Now, I couldn't find definitive evidence on little kids watching this, but I wouldn't be surprised because the police reports it's impossible to capture everything that happened. Obviously, some things might be left out. It's not like there was CCTV in her home, so I'm speculating based off of all of the evidence that we have here and that I presented to everyone. I wouldn't be surprised if the neighborhood kids were involved in watching this as well. And I think one of the most heinous things that they ended up doing, everything they did to her was heinous. They tattooed, "I'm a prostitute and proud of it," on her abdomen using a hot needle. Think about that for a second. They held this poor girl down, and Gertrude started with a hot needle carving into this girl's abdomen, "I'm a prostitute and proud of it." It's absolutely gut-wrenching. And for those of you that can stand the sight of these terrible things, there are pictures online that you can find. Everything, like the case files and the photo evidence, everything is online, and you can see this for yourself if you have the stomach for it. I saw this tattoo on poor Sylvia's body, and it made me want to throw up. It was absolutely disgusting and disturbing. Like I said, a warning, if you are squeamish, do not look this up, but if you are curious as to the state that Sylvia was in, there are pictures online from photo evidence of what happened to her. On October 25th, Sylvia attempted to escape, but given that she was in such a weakened state, because you have to imagine the poor girl couldn't control that whenever she wanted to pee, she couldn't speak properly, her motor skills were completely off. She was malnourished at this point. Even though she wanted to get away, she wasn't able to get away. And because she was so weak and wasn't able to run or to do anything of that sort to help herself, she was caught. And when she was caught by Gertrude and her kids. And Gertrude struck her in the face multiple times with a curtain rod. After the failed attempt and the beating from the curtain rod, Sylvia was then tossed back into the basement, and that's when she tried another attempt to get help. This time, she found the spade in the basement, and she started screaming for help and banging on the basement walls with that spade to get people's attention in the hopes that a neighbor might hear it and probably call the police and tell the police, like, hey, there's a lot of commotion going on in this house. You might want to check it out. There's someone screaming for help. Like, I have no idea what's going on. You should probably go check it out. A neighbor did hear her. A neighbor said that she did hear the commotion, but didn't inform the police about the disturbance because it ended up stopping around 3 a.m. So think about that for a second. This poor girl is trapped in this basement, screaming for help, banging the walls with this shovel. A neighbor hears the commotion that probably went on for hours, and it eventually stopped at 3 a.m, and they think, oh, okay, maybe everything's okay. This is what I don't understand in all of this. Like, nobody had the insight to actually look into what was going on, especially in this situation. Someone admitted to hearing her, and nobody called the police. Unfortunately, by the morning of October 26th, Sylvia was unable to speak intelligibly or correctly coordinate her movement. Sylvia couldn't eat or drink anything. They tried to get her to eat food. Gertrude tried to feed her. They tried talking to her. She was so incoherent. Gertrude thought she was probably faking and decided, well, if you're not going to eat, I'm going to throw you to the ground and abuse you some more, which obviously didn't help anything. That evening, like around 5:30 p.m., Gertrude ordered, I think it was Stephanie, to get Sylvia cleaned up. And they eventually get her cleaned up, dress her in new clothes, and then they laid her on a mattress. Eventually, and unfortunately, Sylvia stopped breathing and died, succumbing to her numerous injuries and wounds. Did they even respect her in death? Absolutely not. Why would they do that? Because Gertrude thought that Sylvia was faking, so the body was subject to further abuse. So Sylvia passed away because of her injuries, and Gertrude the monster thought, she's faking it, so I'm going to beat her some more. When they finally realized that, hey, she's actually dead, that's when they decided to call the police. So the police were called, statements were taken, where Gertrude essentially forced everyone to lie. Obviously, no one's going to admit to what happened, but eventually Gertrude and all of those that participated in the abuse and torture and murder of Sylvia were arrested and charged. The autopsy of her body revealed that she had an excess of 150 separate wounds across her entire body, in addition to being extremely emaciated at the time of her death. And for those of you that are not familiar with the term emaciated, that means she was really malnourished. So if you go ahead and Google emaciated, like, you'll see someone that's like super skinny. You can see their ribs, you can see their bones. Her injuries included burns, severe bruising, extensive muscle and nerve damage. Her vaginal cavity was almost swollen shut. All of her fingernails were broken backwards, and most of the external layers of skin upon her face, breast, neck, and right knee had been peeled or receded. Lichens had evidently bitten through her lips as well, partially severing sections of them from her face. Thankfully, on May 19th, 1966, after a jury deliberated for 8 hours, the panel of 8 men and 4 women found Gertrude Baniszewski guilty of first-degree murder, recommending a sentence of life in imprisonment. Paula Baniszewski was found guilty of second-degree murder, and Hobbs, Hubbard, and John Baniszewski Jr. were found guilty of manslaughter. Upon hearing Judge Rabb's pronouncement of the verdicts, Gertrude and her children bursted into tears and attempted to console each other. Hobbs and Hubbard remained impassive. On May 25th, Gertrude and Paula Baniszewski were formally sentenced to life imprisonment. The same day, Richard Hobbs, Coy Hubbard, John Baniszewski Jr. each received 2 to 21 years to be served in the Indiana Reformatory. Eventually, Gertrude did get out of prison in 1985. After being released from prison, she relocated to Iowa, and she never accepted full responsibility for Sylvia Likens' prolonged torment and death, insisting that she wasn't able to precisely recall any of her actions in the months of Likens' prolonged and increasingly abuse and torment within her home. And guess what she did? She deflected and blamed her actions on the asthma medication that she had been prescribed. To me, that is a complete deflection and a bullshit excuse on her part. She lived in relative obscurity in Laurel, Iowa, until her death due to lung cancer. She ended up dying on June 16th, 1990, at the age of 61.
If you'd like to look into this case further, there are many resources available online. If you search the murder of Sylvia Likens, there have been YouTube documentaries, YouTube videos have been made on this. There have been 2 films made on this. In 2007, they made the film called An American Crime, which is directly based on the life and murder of Sylvia. And the other movie that was loosely based on the murder is The Girl Next Door. And Gertrude Baniszewski, I hope you burn in hell. Thank you for tuning into today's episode of The Wandering Road. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and share with your friends. I hope you have a great day, and I look forward to you joining me for the next one.